Okay, so I guess we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming. My name is Mircea Mutanu. I'm the project associate at the History and Public Policy Program, the Cold War International History Project. Today's meeting features two presentations by our Romanian scholars, Romanian visiting scholars. This is part of a partnership between the Woodrow Wilson Center and the Romanian Cultural Institute. It's been going on for a couple of years now. We hope it will continue. You have the bios of the two Romanian scholars presenting today. Let me just say a couple of words about that. Iana Macrat-Toma is a Romanian Cultural Institute scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center. She holds an MA in history from Central European University in Budapest and a PhD in comparative lit from University of Dartois in France and Gorbachevs University in Cluj-Napoca. Also happened to be my alma mater. Toma has published a number of articles and studies in the field of comparative literature and sociology of literature. Her recently released book, Privilegenția, Literary Institutions in Communist Romania, was ranked Best Book of Literary Theory of the Year by the Romanian Association of Comparative Studies. Her research at the Woodrow Wilson Center encompasses a broad sphere of the cultural Cold War, focusing in particular on radio broadcasting and the role of Radio Free Europe. She'll be talking about her time here at the Wilson Center and the progress on her project. Joining her on the panel to present his research at the center is Liviu Țurău, Romanian Cultural Institute scholar at the center and a senior lecturer at Gorbachevs University in Cluj. He teaches there geopolitics and U.S. foreign policy. He received his doctorate from Gorbachevs in 2004 in modern history and is the author of several books and articles, including Between Washington and Moscow, the U.S. and the Soviet Union Policies of National Security and its Impact upon Romania, 1945 to 1965. It was published in Cluj in 2005, and Romania and International Relations, published in Cluj in 2002. His Wilson Center research project focuses on Romania's relations with the U.S. and the Soviet Union in the second part of the Cold War between 1965 and 1989. I think Iana will start first for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then leave you, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Mircea. First of all, I will start with a disclaimer and with an anecdote. Disclaimer is that I'm working now 30% of my capacity because of a cold, and the anecdote is that because Christmas is getting near, I have a Christmas gift for you, which is the Romanian Revolution. You would wonder probably what is the connection between the Radio Free Europe and the Romanian Revolution. And besides the fact that, of course, Radio Free Europe reported about Romanian Revolution, for me the connection is more important in the sense of the media study. So the medium is important. And I think that the radio played a huge part in the formation of pre-89 listening habits, but also political discourse in communist Romania. And this was seen very well in the times of the revolution and afterwards. What do I mean by that? Radio is a very interesting medium in the sense that it is pervasive yet invisible. So it creates a kind of a social sphere which is neither public nor private, and it allows a kind of a political criticism which is privatized, so indoors political criticism. So this creates a kind of a schizoid political attitude, and this can be very well seen during the Romanian Revolution, when on the one hand you have the outbursts, the popular outbursts in the streets, but on the other hand you have two very interesting interrelated phenomena, which are the colonization of the television studios by the future politicians and leaders of Romania, like Ion Iliescu, and then the silent majorities who are watching the revolution live from their armchairs. So there is a direct link between this colonizing of the media, of the future politicians, and the silent and bleak landscape of Romania, as you can see it in the lower image from this first slide. This is an image from a movie by Corneliu Porumboiu called Was It or Was It Not? And it refers to the Romanian Revolution. Now, when Corneliu Porumboiu was addressing this question, he was trying to see which is the contribution of the remote towns in Romania to the revolutionary fervor, and actually there was not such a thing. But a historian like Stephen Kopkin, for example, he used this kind of image as paradigmatic for the explanation that the civil society did not count as a factor in the collapse of the communist regime. So it's very interesting that this case, the Romanian case, which was rather an exception when accounting for the lack of dissidents within the communist bloc, it became a kind of a paradigmatic case. And okay, now I will get to the actual presentation of the radio. So I'm interested not just in how this type of medium forges political attitudes, but also I'm interested in a sort of a research which go beyond these Cold War linearities, and I would like to know what lies in between these adversarial stances. I mean, the Cold War broadcasting, the American Cold War broadcasting, but also the local propaganda and the security police, and the political ideology from within the communist regimes. I was very much disappointed with the literature which covered this aspect of Cold War broadcasting, because all the literature is written by ex-employees, staff of Radio of Europe, so the literature is very much in this teleological, linear discourse, rhetoric about the mission of Cold War broadcasting, which had a direct liberating effect for these populations that were targeted by the radio. So for me, I think that the problem is more complex than that. First of all, as you saw, I think that one should address the issue of the radio as a specific medium, pervasive yet invisible. Then you have the problem of the unicity of Radio of Europe in the annals of international broadcasting. Then who is addressing whom? Then what hides behind the truth that these officials were saying that they are uttering? What are the registers of anti-communism uttered in front of the microphone? How is information digested by the listeners? And eventually, why does Radio of Europe matters after all? So I would have a briefly historical description of it. Radio of Europe is not a monolithic phenomenon, neither in its institutional setting nor in its historical development. You have three phases. Until the 56th revolution, you have a heroic dramatic period when the tone is very sarcastic and hard-biting, harsh anti-communist. Then you have, until 77, a period of neutralism, focus on news and research, and this coincides with the Ostpolitik. And then until 89, you have the revival of romanticism with human rights rhetoric and anti-communism. You have, I mean, you know what Radio of Europe was about. It was a surrogate domestic broadcaster, broadcasting from Munich to the targeted countries beyond the Iron Curtain. So they were not broadcasting news about America like Voice of America, but they were broadcasting news about local realities. Now, there are a series of paradoxes concerned with Radio of Europe, like, for example, it is neither a public institution nor a private one, because it was secretly funded by CIA until 1973, when it was taken by the Board of International Broadcasting. Then it is not just a journalistic tribune, it is also a research institution, because how can you report about something that it is beyond your reach? That means these local realities. So Radio of Europe developed a very intricate system of documenting and researching these countries. And actually many researchers rely on these documents when they want to find something about communist regimes, and these are in Open Society archives in Budapest. So they were not uttering just news, but codes. They were deciphering the local propaganda, and they were reading between the lines, and that's how they made their broadcast. Of course, they corroborated this with a series of international newspapers. Then another paradox was that they were conceived to fuel anti-communism, but at the same time they were not allowed to foment revolutionary upheaval. So this created a series of animosities in between the American leadership and emigre personnel, because the staff was comprised of exiles from these countries, but also in between the waves of different emigres within the radios. Okay. So in between this auroral image of the radio, which is beaming freedom to this country, this is also a Christmas card concerning the radios, and the blatant anti-radio communist propaganda, which was saying that actually, as you see in the lower image, this caricature is about Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, these two old toads which are croaking in a rubbish bin of fascist relics, right? So in between this auroral image and this this blatant anti-propaganda, you have a plethora of institutional practices, documentary technologies, and difficult processes of making a broadcast. And here you have an image with what a broadcast looks like, a transcript. You have like a palimpsest transcripts, right? So these broadcasts were worked over and over, and this I found in the Hoover archives. Nonetheless, you have also blind invisible figures like this, the figure of this man in the upper right image. This was actually an agent, a Romanian double agent, who was invested with the task of killing two Romanian collaborators for the Romanian death. This is Mihai Haiducu. But besides this, you have a series of collaborators ranging from double agents, spies, and all kinds of messengers who are channeling information in between security police and the radios, and with the knowledge of both agencies, because they needed information. So going back to the radio as a medium, I think that the radio as a transgressive medium is very interesting because it is disseminative, integrative, and invisible. It is no wonder that modern transmission technology derived from war technologies. And here you have a paradox, because the Americans are using a technology which was devised and refined by expansionist powers, and the Americans didn't have experience with foreign broadcasting. Then, for example, if you take the artists, when they are encountered with this new medium, they don't know what to do with it. In Germany, for example, in the 30s, Gottfried Benn realizes a radio drama called The Voice Behind the Curtain, right, like anticipating this. And he's envisioning God acting behind this curtain, because what happens with the radio is a cut between the transmission part and the recording part. So what happens is like the alienation of listeners, but also of the broadcasters because of this transmission technology. Then you have also a kind of an integration of the public and private sphere, and I said it creates a non-public social space, and then at the same time it links together space and time, because the radio broadcast lives in time but creates a soundscape. So this is interesting for the way in which the listeners maybe receive and grasp a political image, message. But then there are a series of problems when one deals with the radio, and especially with the Cold War broadcasting. And first is an epistemological problem, because even if you want to assess audience, you rely on some media theories, on communication theories, which were developed especially in the late 40s, especially for the strategic needs of the Cold War. So no matter what research are you doing, this research is a kind of contingent to its own assumptions. So that's why people who are interested in propaganda are very much annoyed with their own subject, because it's very difficult to step out of its own assumptions. This is very rooted in the tradition of communication as a dominant model, like in Harold Laswell and Wilbur Schramm. Then you have the methodological problems. How can you assess the audience even with these theories? Because you don't have access to these populations. You don't have access to actually what they are listening and what they are doing. So the Research Institute of the Radios relies on indirect assessment, the information brought by the defectors and by the travelers. And they were doing questionnaires, and they were relying on that when they were discussing, for example, personal profiles of these persons. They were using questionnaires which are very constant throughout the years, and this is the problem. There is little self-reflection. But one can see this obsession with scientism in order to detect listenership trends. Then, of course, last but not least, you have technical problems, because how can you see if somebody is really listening to your broadcast or to your radio if the listener actually is continually shifting channels in this epoch when the radios were jammed. But still, if one would corroborate all these analyses that the Eastern Europe audience and opinion research were doing and the Soviet area audience and opinion research were doing, and I did this, I put this together, and still you can see some reliable data in terms of listening trends. So, for example, in the 80s, Radio Free Europe is very much listened. But one also finds the solidarity period, okay? And then also one can find some unattended things, like only 80% of the population is interested in dissidence, or that the Romanians do listen to the local radio, or that during Solidarity Voice of America is more listened to it, or even that the rates of tuning in for informational purposes exceeds the rates of trusting the radio. Okay, one should take also into account the fact that Radio Free Europe had a double amount of repeats than the other radios had, because they had to repeat their programs because of jamming. So one difficult thing is to assess listenership. The other difficult thing is to gather information for the broadcast themselves. And how did they do that? I told you they were monitoring the official press. Then they were using agents, right? And when I say agents, I'm not referring to this fictional James Bond thing, but to all kinds of messengers who were bringing information. Then you have this battle of news, which later is transformed into a kind of a battle of books. All agents at some point produce books at the end of their career, and after the Frolik defection, you have the Frolik book, and then the Haiduku, and then the Chekhovich. So you have this battle of versions still continuing, right, during the Cold War and after. And then what happens also is that maybe you have a news which was channeled by one of these persons, but you cannot give it as a reliable news because you don't have this two-source reporting, which was very requested by the American leadership. So what they were doing is like transpiring the news to some foreign news agency, and then they were taking the news back. So in the Romanian case, this was done with the help of a person like Mihnea Berindei, for example. He was very active in Paris. This is not on a regular basis, but this would happen very often. So my question is, what is news then? Is this transcendental reporting, or you have just a mutual observation of these mutual observing agencies like security police, the nomenclatura, and on the other hand, Radio Free Europe, eventually reinforcing discursive trends and what I call genre politics. And when I say genre politics, what do I mean by that? For example, a good report about a communist means that this is a non-loyal communist for the local nomenclatura. Samizdat always means anti-communist, although if you have a nationalist, for example, samizdat. Censorship means criticism, and here Monica Lovinescu had real problems when some books were banned, but they were not anti-communist. Then maybe they don't have a differentiated image about the communist leaders, and here I discussed yesterday with Rose, for example. They misperceived Imre Nagy, but they also misperceived the Hungarian Democratic Forum, which took place at Lakitelek in 1987. But throughout this period, you have a paranoia concerning information. For example, Gomulka, who gets more information than his possibility of processing. Then you have 5 institutes in Poland, which monitor constantly the Radio Free Europe output. But this is just to illustrate what I was saying. So my argument is that instead of a real interaction between broadcasters and listeners, you have more of a ritual confrontation between the broadcasters and the political elite in these countries. And Radio Free Europe functions through inventorying denigration. They constantly archive these caricatures which appear in the propaganda because they want to show that, look, they have an impact. So, and afterwards they are looking for systemic flow. So how can you report about these realities if you are using the self-castigating news of the regimes themselves? This creates a kind of a timeliness of topics. Topics are repeated. Then you have broadcasts with listening features. You have these the denunciatory politics. You have broadcasts like the Black Book or the Black Voice for the Hungarian department. And you have this misperception. For example, during the Polish revolt, the Polish desk is not fomenting restlessness as Stas suggests, but rather struggles in a void of information. And I found this in National Archives here. So when I'm thinking of the underpinning philosophy and practice of this Manichaean dynamism, I think of a strict delineation of a symbolic battle and of a standardization and obsession with scientism, as I said. And I encounter, for example, in the National Archives when they are trying to put together a philosophy for the USIA, United States Information Agency, for example, they are trying to cut the world in half and to see which half is communist and which half is anti-communist, and to try to inventor the anti-communist symbol. For example, what do you do with a country like Cambodia where you don't know what are the anti-communist or the communist symbols? So they come up with the idea to name that the five-domed Angkor Wat is communist and the other one, the three-domed, is anti-communist. But this is, okay, an anecdote, but this is illustrative. How much time do I have?
None.
Okay.
So, a couple of minutes.
Thank you. The division is appropriated within the Romanian field as a division between the cultural broadcast from Paris and political broadcast from Munich. And for example, this Cold War ideology is appropriated by the cultural broadcaster as a moral cultural catechism based on the assumption on the disrupted identity between East and West. This is Monica Lovinescu in her 30s, the most prominent Romanian broadcaster. And then in Munich, you have exposing the material evidence of on the assumption of the differences between East and West. So still the division between East and West, but interestingly appropriated through local traditions. In between these blocks of discourse, you have the listeners who are kind of lost. So, for example, as I encounter here in the archives, political revelations are not primary motives for defecting during the Sviatlu case, for example. Or the Romanian listeners understand the issue of human rights as humanitarian offer. They don't have this abstract notion of politics. Then, while being the main recipient of epistolary complaints, the political leaders are paradoxically also seen as the main agents of change. And what happens is that the listeners are actually sending letters to Radio Free Europe, but the main destinatary is Ceausescu himself. So all these letters practically, they address to Ceausescu through Radio Free Europe. Of course, that they say that they praise Radio Free Europe, but actually their hope is Ceausescu here. So this is the epistolary roundabout. So why does Radio Free Europe matters for me? Radio Free Europe is an important factor in the genealogy of Romanian post-communism because it enhanced the kind of, as a real opposition, not real opposition, enhanced the peculiar interaction between elites and the masses. It was also an example of local appropriation of international politics, a case study of an analytical instance under conditions of poor information, and an element in the creation and reproduction of an ideological system which, while functioning as an adversarial arena, relied on informal exchanges. So by studying Radio Free Europe and consequently security police files, I think we can understand better the issue of collaborators and informal exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. We'll move now from Radio Free Europe to a more general overview of Romania within the Cold War and in the second part of the Cold War. Leave you.
Thank you, Mircea. As you know, my project, it's geopolitical game Romania between United States and Soviet Union in the last 2 decades and a half of the Cold War. This project aims to analyze the evolution of the three actors in the mature period of the Cold War. Once well-known Geir Lundestad shows that every scholar in the Cold War is tempted to reveal his country's role in this long conflict. Indeed, I approached this subject in the past when I tried to explain the evolution of Romania between 1945 and 1965. As a country dominated by the Soviet Union because of its own geography, Romania was ruled by a communist regime that kept, even after Stalin's death, more deeply features of the Stalinism than Soviet Union. This national Stalinism has opened the prospect, it wasn't a paradoxus, of an autonomous foreign policy towards the Soviet Union. As a result, communist Romania tried to approach United States, and United States have looked favorably as communist Romania goes away from Moscow line. In the last 2.5 decades of the Cold War, Romania became a special case. Until the late 70s, US tried to capitalize the so-called independent foreign policy of Ceausescu. There were several channels that seemed to make Romania a possible mediator in the peripheral areas of the Cold War. On the other hand, the regime led by Ceausescu was the least reformist even in the terms of the Soviet world. However, despite some opposition in the matter of foreign policy, the Soviets remain convinced that communism is secure in Romania. In the 80s, Ceausescu's regime became increasingly isolated and even undesirable, but for Reagan and George Bush in the United States, as well as Gorbachev in the Soviet Union. My research plan is designed to be interdisciplinary. I try to analyze and discuss different strategies of the two superpowers and their impact on Romania. By now I will avoid to refer to military strategy, atomic bombs and so on, but I will intend to dedicate a chapter in this perspective. The period of research here gave me the opportunity to study specific files of the National Security Archives, National Security Record Administration, and also in some presidential libraries, Nixon, Carter. Ronald Reagan was an intention only. And to correlate historical reconstruction with specific developments in fields as strategic, military, economic, political, cultural. It is the hope of every scholar to discover new elements in archives and other documentary sources, to reveal through deductive and inductive analysis, reason conclusion, and contribute to a better understanding of the subject studied. 2.5 decades that preceded the end of the Cold War were a complex period in which long cold peace, if it were to quote John Lewis Gaddis, confirmed that it is preferable to a hot conflict between the two superpowers. However, the arms race and the risk of collision between the two camps continue to exist. Especially the wars started in the periphery of Eurasia seem to be the biggest dangers in maintaining peace. Since the end of the 7th decade, is clearly talking about the period of detente in East-West relations. Major contribution in this direction was made by triangular policy initiated by President Nixon, to which Henry Kissinger has made an important contribution. Opening relations with China gave a higher value to Eastern Europe policy of the United States. In fact, since his first year as president, Richard Nixon continued strategy to enhance building bridges to East European Soviet satellites. In this regard, it has liberalized U.S. trade policy and tried to give these countries the economic advantages. It can be furthered out in the known direction of National Security 58 report, which aimed the fragmentation of the Soviet bloc unity and encouraging the development of national interests in those countries. From this point of view, Romania represented in the end of 60s and in 70s a major political aim for the regional policy of United States in Eastern Europe. After having been under Stalin the most enslaved Eastern European country, Romania has tried to build from early 60s a so-called independent policy. In fact, convinced Stalinist, as Professor Vladimir Tismaneanu argued in his book about the permanence of Stalinism in Romanian communist mind, Romanian communist leaders tried to obtain full autonomy in domestic policy in what regards the relationship with the Soviets. For this purpose, they choose to initiate departure from Soviet-imposed alignment in foreign policy matters. The communist government of Romania now opens the idea of economic cooperation with Western powers, and the relationship with the United States of America quickly became privileged. For US, Romanians' opposition to Soviet Union in various national and international policy issues raised great interest for a while, even after the assessment made in the National Security Council since mid-60s showed that the Soviets were far to allow the Finlandization of Eastern Europe, as hoped in a medium-term program Zbigniew Brzezinski in early 60s. He, together with William Griffith, were the authors of this strategy to build bridges from US, from west to eastern part of Europe. Even in terms of stabilization of East-West detente, for American analysts had become clear the possible limits of US strategy in Eastern Europe. At least up to the Helsinki Conference in 1975, the United States agreed to accept from communist countries of Eastern Europe a slight political liberalization and punctual solving human rights cases. From this point of view, Romania has become a favorite player in the United States, thanks to the front made to the Soviets, but also because Ceausescu's regime was willing to become a mediator and open communication channels in area of conflict, or where US opportunities were limited or nil in communicating with opponents. Communist Romania has started to become useful in this regard since the last years of Johnson administration, and recorded the most significant contribution when Nixon and Kissinger opened lines of communication with China and preparing strategic retreat from Vietnam. Even if Romania's support was limited, he was seen in Washington in the perspective of resolving other conflicts, especially in the so insecure area of the Middle East. Moreover, for a time, President Nixon tried to build a special relationship with Romania, which became in 1969 the first Soviet bloc country visited by an American president. Former President Nixon memoirs, those of Henry Kissinger, and especially the documents I looked of National Archives, Record Administration, and National Security Archives. Also, some of them founded in Carter Center, shows that the US cabinet was aware of Stalinist character of Romania's leadership. However, in terms of foreign policy, Romania was considered to be maverick, especially that sometimes became an alternative voice in the Soviet bloc and into the Warsaw Treaty Organization. In this context, Romania has received US support for membership of the IMF, World Bank, and GATT. Also, Nixon is the first official visit of Ceausescu in the United States and opened the process of granting most favored nation clause to Romania. This policy was continued by Gerald Ford during his brief term as president. Ford honored Nixon's preset visit in Romania in 1975, and also during his administration, Romania received MFN. American officials agreed, as Kissinger files reveals, to provide solid support to the development of Romanian economy, including access to certain technologies prohibited, generally speaking, for export to the communist world. They claim, in a sharp exchange, liberalization of immigration from Romania, especially from Jews and different neo-Protestant denominations, more attention and respect for human rights. As shown in the transcript of talks in Bucharest, 2-3 August 1975, between Ford, Kissinger, and Harry Burns, the American ambassador in Romania, on the American side, and Ceausescu, Mania Mănescu, the Prime Minister, and George Macovescu, Deputy Foreign Minister, and also their translators. US officials have praised the still distinguished voice of Romania and President Ceausescu in the Soviet bloc, but also Romanians' involvement in the non-aligned movement and in the G77, group of 77 southern countries mostly. Romania enjoyed a privileged position during Carter administration when Ceausescu undertook his last official visit in the United States. According to the analyst it prepared in the office of Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor of President Carter, Romania remains a good actor for U.S. interest. Also, in the National Security Council, in different reports, Romania was framed in the same category as Yugoslavia, who was a communist country, but not in the Soviet bloc. So it was revealed quite underline Romanian independent policy in international matters. With all reservation generated by Ceausescu's miserable domestic policy, Carter accepted the visit of the Romanian Communist president, but declined at the beginning of his term as president idea to visit Romania and to give Ceausescu a new moral support and international prestige. However, the Carter administration has noted Romania's position condemning the Soviet invasion in Afghanistan and previous and similar views on maintenance the Shah regime in Iran. However, soon after Tito's death, analysis made in National Security Council anticipated a decrease in the role of Ceausescu as mediator and show clear the limits of his Stalinistic but yet anti-Soviet regime. Energy crisis of the early 80s, especially the lack of reforms and economic efficiency, brought Romania into a very bad situation. In the last year of Carter's term, Ceausescu requested something quite strange, an expansion of the arms trade between Romania and the US. He saying that Romania wants to replace, as Yugoslavia had done before, a part of Soviet arms and technology. The claim was considered frivolous, and he could not rise any Republicans of Reagan administration. In fact, in the last decade of the Cold War, Ceausescu has yet been able to keep a certain influence as long as Andropov and Chernenko have returned to a speech and aggressive intention reminiscent of the years 1950s and 60s. In fact, Ceausescu continued the game of dissidence with the Soviets. In front of Andropov in 1983, and in the front of Andropov attempts to centralize the action of Warsaw Pact, Ceausescu threatened again, as he made in 60s and in 70s, to leave the Warsaw Treaty Organization. Being himself tough, Andropov replied smiling, "And what will you do after that? Think Reagan likes you? You are wrong, but I even less interest in this," was Andropov's answer. Coming of Gorbachev as leader of the USSR has dramatic consequences upon the role played by Romania in the Cold War. In US perception, at the time, Romania completely lost its usefulness. If for strategic and tactical reasons, US officials have accepted to overlook reactionary domestic policy of Ceausescu, Romania now become obstructionist even in the foreign policy, although still having serious advantages of Jewish lobby here in US, Ceausescu acted out of vanity and gave up the most favored nation clause. Anyway, the visit of Gorbachev in the same year left Ceausescu as one of the most reactionary communist leaders in Eastern Europe. In fact, the relations with the Soviets weren't less important than the relations with United States of America in these last 2 decades and a half of the Cold War. Romanian communist leadership had several fights with the Soviets, but on the other hand, even if the Soviets thought that the communism is deeply secure in Romania, they never trust Ceausescu and his regime. By instance, in 1968, when Ceausescu became a kind of hero because his condemnation of Warsaw Treaty Pact Soviet invasion in Czechoslovakia. In fact, he wasn't invited even to know about the fact. On the other hand, when he perceived that the Soviets became angry, he was ready to sign to renew bilateral treaty as in 1970, even in the military matters. Also, from time to time, even he declared to be apart from Warsaw Pact maneuvers. He accepted to participate, Romania military to participate in these acts. Anyway, Romania also developed a very strange relation in economic matters with the Soviet Union. First of all, because Ceausescu's Romania refused to apply and to bring any reforms, any modern reforms in economy, but also in social fields and politics. Well, some very short, I hope, conclusion. I have the intention to bring, when I finalize this project, accurate contribution to reveal the Romanian role in the Cold War, sometime exaggerated one, sometime not. And also to introduce the new data which was declassified from primary sources. Until now I was able to work in Romanian archives and to search in national and diplomatic archives. All those funds and documents became accessible in the last years, and I stopped to comment anymore. Also, I checked the edited documents, mainly foreign relations of the United States, the official papers of different presidencies. I like to reveal here that in a quantitative analysis, I was able to conclude that if Romania was most frequently mentioned in the 60s under Johnson and Nixon, and in 70s under Ford and Carter, Romania became a quite rare name in 80s in all those official papers of the United States government. Also, I tried to collect data from other archives here in Washington, from National Archives, from National Security Archives, as I said, from Nixon and Carter's memorial libraries, and also some data from Public Record Office, Great Britain. Also, it is in my intention to reveal the evolution of interpretative literature. You know, and I don't have any intention to be very critical, but I have to say that some very good analyses considered to be in 60s and 70s now are not, because the events was going in a different direction. But anyway, it is important for me to be in intellectual correspondence with some famous authors as, Sonnenfeld, Linden, Gartow, and so on, or Zbigniew Brzezinski. Thank you.
Thank you. And right on time. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A. Please do me a favor and wait for the microphone. ID yourself, Vladimir. Wait for the microphone. Right there.
Okay, thank you very much. Vladimir Tismananu, University of Maryland. Thanks for the very thoughtful and illuminating presentations for me. I found lots of interesting things. I have I don't have comments to make. I would like to have two questions, very specific. One is to Ioana. In as much as I looked into the archives or I interviewed people, it seems that at a certain moment, probably in the late 60s, RFE becomes truly a marotte, as they say, or an obsession for the Romanian leadership. It clearly was not under Gheorghe Udej. I mean, I read a lot of the Politburo transcripts and so on. From time to time, there are some references to some obscure radio stations. The chief ideological hack, Leon Terautu, for instance, speaks about România Viitoare, the future Romania radio station broadcasting from Greece. I never knew about that, so, whatever that was. Okay, but it becomes clearly, so it's in a way amazing that as Romania engages in the foreign policy maverick stance that Liviu discussed here, simultaneously it gets an increasingly nervous, anxious, if you want. So if we take the Jowett interpretation of the transition from the anxiety-driven elites to confidence-building elites or whatever in revolutionary breakthroughs, why the confidence-building or the inclusive elite, on the one hand, they cease jamming RFE, on the other hand, they organize campaigns in the media which are unique, to the best of my knowledge, in the Soviet bloc. So I would like to have some, if you have some hypothesis or some guess on that. For Liviu, I had a question. In the documents that two things. In the documents that you consulted, and they sound absolutely fascinating, to what extent was Romania kind of bridge or a communicational channel, or whatever you want to call it, regarding North Korea? That's because, taking into account Ceausescu's special relationship with Kim Il-sung, his 2 or 3 visits to North Korea, also the fact that Romania is the only Warsaw Pact country to have been visited by Kim Il-sung. I mean, I've always tried to find the transcripts of the conversations between Ceausescu and Kim Il-sung, and that I think we can get a lot of stuff there. I couldn't find them, or they exist, but they didn't give them to me. Okay, so it will be very interesting. Second, in the people like Sonnenfeld and others you mentioned, to what extent was the Romanian, let's say, Titoist option or Yugoslavization of Romania in 65, 66, 60, before Ceausescu made clear it was not possible, because he didn't want it. But to what extent it was considered that Romania could go as far ever as Yugoslavia did go in terms of both maverick foreign policy, non-aligned, between the blocs, whatever, and also domestic changes. Probably the last, and I apologize, the last one. To what extent the reports that you saw cared about, minimalistic as it was, and insignificant as Steve Kotkin may put it, there was some dissent in Romania. There were some dissidents, and there were people who were risking their lives. To what extent, because I remember Mihai Botez, the late dissident, once told me that he met an important voice of American journalism at the embassy in Bucharest, a guy who was reporting for, I'm not going to give names, but anyway, somebody who was very frequently in the pages of the New York Times. And, Botez tried to explain what they were trying to do, etc. And the answer was, we are not interested truly in Romanian dissidents. We are interested in the dissident politics of Mr. Ceausescu. So, in other words, a very different status for dissent in Romania than dissent, let's say, in Czechoslovakia, Poland, or Hungary. Thank you very much.
Well, Georgiou also monitored the Radio Free Europe broadcasts. In Mihai Perlin's book, So in Mihai Perlin's book about Radio Free Europe, Milica and Eterul, he starts with that, like Georgiou annotating what the Radio Free Europe broadcasters were saying, and he was insulting them. You didn't like that, okay, then I will hit you harder. And it was a kind of anecdotal interaction. But it's true, Romanian stops jamming in 63, right? The Hungarians stopped jamming in 64. But this is because they didn't have money to do it. It was very expensive to jam. For example, the Soviets are investing, I think, 8 times that the Americans are investing on their radios. They are investing on jamming. That is like $800 billion. So the poorest countries didn't have the possibilities to do that. On the other hand, even if not jammed, the Romanian broadcast could be heard not so well. So in this sense, maybe it was useless. Then it's true that when the Romanian wants to have a lighter image outside, maybe that was an advantage, right, this thing to stop jamming. But at the same time, these broadcasts were very useful for them in order to know what was happening inside their own nomenclatura and inside the country with the dissidents and everything. So at some point, there was an interest for letting these broadcasts being not jammed. A contingent interest and a strategic interest. And what was... for you?
Please, if you like to give me a help.
Yeah, what was the second that you asked for, Livy? Because I had some... Okay.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I found very few data in Romanian archives about the possibility of a channel through Bucharest with North Korea. I found several things, a lot of things, in about end of 60s to beginning of 80s about Romanian and Ceausescu interference as a mediator with Vietnam, with China for a little bit, but mainly with the Middle East. And
let me just jump in here, and there are documents on North Korea. We actually have some of the discussions between Ceausescu and Kim Il-sung. There was some attempts by Ceausescu to interpose himself as a possible mediator between the United States and North Korea. It didn't go anywhere, and from the discussions I've seen between Ceausescu and Kim Il-sung, you would be amazed just how boring they are. And that is not to say that they don't have actual discussions about possible mediation and stuff like that. It's just they're not in the official minutes, and I've seen it again and again and again where official minutes have one thing, and then you have attached to the official minutes handwritten notes about the side conversation that they had on the in the case of China on the Pakistan nuclear program. That would have been great to have in official minutes, but it wasn't going to make it there. So sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you.
I've seen some of those, but they're not.
For your contribution, I like to say that in the time Ceausescu was the one who tried to offer a lot of things for U.S. officials mainly to be a mediator, because it was in his own interest to become and to earn a tall stature in international fields. About the evaluation concerning the possibility of Yugoslavization of Romania. In my opinion, all the hopes ended in 60s. In 60s, in fact. Richard Nixon, with all his, kind of sympathy to Ceausescu for a while, knew very well who was Ceausescu from the beginning. Also Kissinger and so on. Anyway, Ceausescu was very open to any U.S. proposal. As I saw several transcripts of his meetings with, Kissinger team, Brzezinski team, and so on. I can say that Ceausescu, even he liked to be a tough guy. Finally, he agreed with the proposal and added something more. Also, I saw that Ceausescu get and earned some confidence from very different Arab states leaders, from Morocco to Syria and vice versa. Also, it was important for Romania that, what Romania earned in fact in 1967, when Romania became the first Soviet bloc country who established diplomatic and political relations with Federal Germany and refused to interrupt diplomatic relations with Israel. And this was, a very good thing for even for Ceausescu policy here in United States of America. So the Yugoslavization of Romania. In early 70s, all the important analysts were very skeptical about, because Ceausescu's regime, Tito wasn't a Democrat, but was so different by Ceausescu as a structure, as a politician, and so on. This was probably also the reason that Kissinger, Brzezinski, and so on encouraged Ceausescu to become more and deeply involved in the third world problems and movements and conferences and organization. Yes, unfortunately, about the fate of dissidents in Romania. Well, I can begin my answer saying that recently I saw a lot of documents about the problem of Pacepa escape from Romania. At the time, because U.S. liked to kept Romania and Ceausescu as a protégé, it was very serious under discussion that Pacepa, they refused even the idea to give Pacepa back in Romania, but they discussed the idea to don't keep Pacepa in the United States and to let him to go in a third-part country. And also I saw a little shame, as to say, when from the American official parts, when even to Zbigniew Brzezinski, under the assault of, by instance, Stefan Andrei, the foreign minister. Because, on the agenda, Andrei came with, the preset issues, and, probably he was a good diplomat. I don't agree with him, but, and at one time he asked, if you like to do this, you have to listen to us and give back Pacepa. Yes, this was in fact, as I consulted the archive, U.S. were very tolerant concerning the dissident activity in Romania. Yes, U.S. tried to resolve some punctual cases, as Vlad Georgescu, Mihai Botez, and so on, but not in the case of Paraschiv. Goma wasn't, in fact, quite protégé at the time.
Can I add something here? Well, I happened to look into the Goma problem, and when Goma sent first letters to Radio Europe, they wouldn't be broadcast because the American leadership thought that they are too boring and not interesting, and it is because of Monica Lovinescu's effort to make a hard lobby for Goma, that Goma became Goma. I mean, when I wanted to take an interview, for example, to Emil Hurezeanu, I called him and I said, well, I would like to know more about Radio Free Europe, about how the editing part worked, how you constructed dissidents. And then he was appalled and he said, we didn't construct a dissident, dissidence was actually existing. But what I was meaning is that dissident is actually happening as an event, as this juncture between a broadcasting practice, kind of a fervor inside a country, and maybe some American tolerance or ignorance. So this is not just happening, but this must be mediated, right?
This is what Havel says in The Power of the Powerless. I mean, the greengrocer may, take out the famous workers of all countries unite 15 times if it's not known.
Yeah. So this was Monica Lovinescu. She actually contacted the Human Rights League. She organized the press releases. She also talked about the radio, and it was actually the Munich agency which was more retarded in times in terms of broadcasting these dissidents. Yeah.
I'm Martin Dimitrov. I have a technical question for Ioana, and then a real question, and then a question for Liviu. Ioana, I am interested in this graph where you show listenership to Radio Free Europe, and there is a strange decline in Romania. So what explains this decline from 85% in the early 80s to, 50% by 85? This is just very strange. And the question I had for you is about these letters that citizens write to Radio Free Europe. Yeah. And you say that they're really letters to Ceausescu. So what I want to ask you about is, what happens once the letters get broadcast? Do you have archival evidence on how the regime reacts to these letters? Do they try to introduce certain measures in order to limit the number of such complaints in the future, or do they actually go after the people that wrote these letters? What happens once the letters are written? Because I have looked at similar letters that are written in Bulgaria directly to the leadership, so I know how the leadership reacts to these and how seriously they take them. But the ones that actually get broadcast on to Radio Free Europe and such like outlets, the leadership takes note of these letters and it thinks, well, they certainly impact what people think. But I certainly haven't found specific instances of how they react to these letters. So it would be interesting to know what happens in the Romanian case. And for Liviu, the question that I had for you is about what the Soviet Union is doing when Romania is becoming so closely involved with the United States. So why is it that the Soviet Union allows Ceausescu to do that? Because the other cases in the communist camp where countries may develop closer relationships with the United States, such as Yugoslavia and China, in both cases, these countries severed relations with the Soviet Union. And in the case of Romania, you have this very interesting case where Romania sort of participates in the Warsaw Pact, but sometimes doesn't participate. And then, of course, there's also Comecon, the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, where Romania does participate, except it doesn't trade so heavily with the Soviet Union. So what do the Soviet archives reveal in terms of efforts by Brezhnev and then his successors to limit the Romanian-American rapprochement by economic levers that the Soviet Union had, or potentially military levers?
So, first of all, concerning letters. Well, when I took interviews with Mihai Berindei, for example, who was one of the main recipients of these letters, he said that all requests were... can you hear me? Yeah. So all requests were obeyed by the political regime, and everybody would be let go if they wanted to reintegrate with their family or if they wanted something. So he said that all requests done through Radio Free Europe were listened by the political leadership. But this is just the opinion of Mihai Berindei, okay? But then I have another friend who wrote a book about the personality cult in Romania, the personality cult of Ceausescu. Her name is Manuela Marin, and she actually worked on these archives of the Central Committee where they were receiving also these kind of requests. And she is saying that what would happen is just a bureaucratic procedure. They were just inventorying this and maybe working on some of them on a very disparate basis. Or some were even lost in the process. So, of course, Ceausescu wouldn't read these letters, right? So, I don't know, in between these two, what can be argued. And on the other hand, you have some interesting business making with the Radio Free Europe editors themselves. For example, if somebody would send a request to go to the West because his family was there, his letter would be read in front of the microphone by Emil Georgescu, right, who was an editor for the political program in Romania. But Emil Georgescu also had a law business in Germany. And then after these people would came, because they were let go by the regime, right, in order not to have the dissidents, they were very much interested in letting these people go. Then he would intermediate their relocation in the West, and he would take money. This I found in the security police files. So you have to corroborate all these sources. So the requests, they were met with some interest on both sides. I mean, then why do the Romanian listenership drops in 85? Well, first of all, that this data cannot be considered fully reliable. Okay, we discussed about this. Then the second point is that there are some issues in the early 80s which interest very much the Romanian audience, like the transcendental meditation, the Virgil Tănase kidnapping. So these are high point issues that attract audience. And then you have this drop because you don't have issues anymore. I think, journalistic issues which were engaged very well by the Radio Free Europe. And then also you have, of course, the solidarity issue. But you see that all the trends are dropping in the late 80s, and maybe you should answer here, I don't know.
The local press in other Eastern European regimes becomes more interesting, so people are reading that.
Yes, but in Romania was not the case.
So that's been
No. Yeah, no. In Romania, maybe it was just... total passivity and total discomfiting. I don't know, disappointment. But the thing is that there were some problems that they were interested in the early 80s, and when these issues were not longer there, so maybe they just turned off. But I remember my parents listening to the radios, right, in the late 80s, and this was done almost by everybody in all the apartments in a very clandestine way. So, and, okay.
Well, it was a double cross from the both sides, from the Soviets and from Romanian communists. In fact, the Soviets were deeply interested to keep the hegemonical zone of Eastern Europe under their control. So they never saw in Ceausescu a threat, because Ceausescu was more communist than they themselves. Yes, Ceausescu never was a reformer. Ceausescu never was Dubček. Ceausescu never threatened the stability of the Marxism, Leninism, and Stalinism, the essence, in fact, of the communist regime. Also, Romania became very, very secure, and this is very interesting about the body of communist regime in Romania. From the early 50s, when none other so-called comrades parties still exist, it was a unique situation until the 1956 revolution in Hungary, when after revolution, the Hungarian Party of the Workers, or something like that, became the only party. But other friendly parties, small, irrelevant parties, but as a pluralism in socialism, still exist in Bulgaria, in Poland, by fortune, in 1989, they played a very important role. So, yes, it was a very sensitive play between communists in Romania and in Kremlin. But Ceausescu never crossed the line. It was somewhere a line, and Ceausescu never crossed the line. He never threatened the communism. He followed, his own or national interest, but never threatened the communism. And never threatened Soviet Union in essential issues.
Please. I would assume actually that, well, from the evidence that's out there, that the Soviets were more afraid of the Romanians joining forces with the Chinese in terms of the international communist movement than they were ever worried about joining forces with the United States or with the West. I don't think there was ever a fear. They were an annoyance. They continued to be an annoyance throughout the 70s and 80s, but it was never a question of we're going to lose them or they're going to leave the Warsaw Pact or something like that. As far as your question about leverage, certainly the Soviets attempted several times to leverage the natural resources that they were passing on to them, they were selling to the Romanians, cutting off I don't remember how the
name of
prime, coal. Coal, yeah, there you go. Thank you. Cutting off coal, for example, at some point in I believe 71 or 72, the Nixon administration actually does a great deal of lobbying on two coal-producing companies in the U.S. on behalf of the Romanians to get them the necessary materials on the market. So there's up until about the 70s, there's some attempt, some influence that the Soviets are attempting to exercise. By the mid 70s into the 80s, they actually changed the way Comecon works. It becomes more of a fluctuating price, more of a market price, which the Romanians, as a matter of fact, oppose greatly throughout. Every time the Soviets come up with new ideas about how to change the way we sell you guys materials, the Romanians are always there about talking about bartering, talking about well, we can't give you hard currency, we can't do this, we can't do that, but you have to be on our side because we're all communists. But when it comes to the flip side of that, that's not going to work. So, but they're fairly insulated, I think. So, Ross, there you go.
This one work? Yeah. Ross Johnson, the Wilson Center. Thank you both. Thank you both very much. I guess mostly for Liviu, U.S. policy after the very early 50s, after 53, was encouraging national communism. And the model, of course, was Titoism. And the hope or the thought was some autonomy in international affairs and domestic liberalization. And first Poland in 56, that didn't last very long. And the dilemma didn't really come up that came up later in Romania because in neither area did things progress. In fact, they regressed. Domestic liberalization, international autonomy in Poland. And we come to the case of Romania. And I suppose then from what? I mean, we could discuss which years particularly, but I suppose in the 70s and at least in the first couple of years in the 80s, you have this debate in the United States and in the West, the relative balance here between the value of this international autonomy, obstructionism of certain Soviet initiatives versus the increasing domestic repression. I think Vladimir and I have debated this issue a bit in the early 80s, for example. The question then would be, in Romanian historiography and studies in Romania today that draw on the archives and everything else, understanding that Ceausescu was a terrible person and this was a terrible regime. Is there any acknowledgement in the Romanian literature that in some respects Romania may, under this dictatorial Ceausescu regime, may have played a positive geopolitical role in the East-West relationship? Is there any argument or acknowledgement of that? That would be my question to you. And then for Oana, back to the letters, which are always a very interesting issue. And I think the Romanian service in particular was unique in broadcasting these letters in this way and to this extent. Mm-hmm. And going back to the chart that you showed there earlier, perhaps you could say a little more about how you saw the chart with the letters? What was the function? I mean, yes, Radio Free Europe, mediated these letters? Obviously, making the contents known to the broad strata of Romanian society, as well as presumably a larger number of the elites than would have gotten a letter that had been sent to the letters department of the Central Committee directly. But as you've looked at that, do you see sort of the letters being mediated, distorted? I mean, just exactly how do you see the role there would be my question. Just a comment, or perhaps it's an objection. I've not really looked into the history of Emil Georgescu, the broadcaster, but I wouldn't think we should take an accusation in the Securitate files as necessarily fact.
The issue is that the Securitate, they just notice this. They don't even know what to do with the information. So the Securitate is not even as evil as we thought. I mean, they didn't even know what to do with this. So it's not an accusation. Sorry.
Before you guys start answering those, any other questions? No, fantastic. So go ahead.
So the letters, right? Yes. Well, first of all, I had access to the letters ranging from 81 to 84, right, which were addressed to Radio Free Europe. And these letters, I didn't see it in the holograph form, right? I saw it in a typescript form, so I don't know what happened to them in between. But still, even like this, you have parts of the letters which are censored by the editors because maybe they are too phlegmatic or too sarcastic towards Ceausescu. And this is paradoxical because on the one hand they are insulting Ceausescu, and on the other hand they are addressing Ceausescu for resolving their issues. Then what kind of letters are receiving? This is also interesting because you have two broadcasts, human rights program, where they wanted just integration with their families, right? And here you have mostly letters coming from minorities, right? German ethnic minorities or religious minorities. Baptists, for example, many letters from Baptists, many letters from Hungarian minorities, German minorities. And then if you have a large series of Romanian letters, they were mostly concerned, and letters which do not have a specific request, right? These letters are just indicting Ceausescu and seeing him as a monster or as a kind of a fictional character which has buttons and can manipulate politics. So the main evil behind all this is Ceausescu, like a transcendent god. And what I'm interested in this letter is not, as Martin asked me, if they are listened to and maybe met by the Romanian leadership, but for me the important part is their discursive part, how the population is perceiving politics through these letters. And what is happening is that they are addressing to Radio Free Europe as to a magical entity in order to beat another magical entity with this Radio Free Europe. So this perception is a very fairy tale-like. And also their references are taken from 19th century poetries and literature concerned with feudal opprimation by feudal landlords on the Romanian population. So it is a very fictional and patriarchal way of seeing politics. So I think this is even more interesting than the factual data if these letters were actually responded to or not. And Then, of course, you have also letters which were sent particularly by the security police as disinformation letters. And I encountered 3 or 4 letters like that. Actually, I asked Nicolae Constantin Munteanu about them, because the security police would send letters from apparently dead persons in order to discredit Radio Free Europe. Right? And then they were saying, look, you said about this person, but this person is dead, so Radio Free Europe has no reliability. But this was just on 3 or 4 cases, right? And they were misjudging these letters, so they really broadcasted these letters. But it happened. So this is the distortion part. Yes, but mostly these letters came not by email, but they were brought by persons, right? By confident persons, so they couldn't be forged so easily. Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting question, Ross. Thank you very much. Well, I like to start with, the relevance of national interest in that geopolitical game of Romania. Well, if I remember well, Winston Churchill wrote in his memoirs that in the midsummer of 1940, de Gaulle arrived in England with 2 suitcases and the whole honor of France. At the time in France, de Gaulle was seen to be a traitor. So, vice versa. Probably, Ceausescu and Andrei performed at the time in foreign policy, in Romanian foreign policy. My question is, what was the benefits for their own people? It was any benefits or only to strengthen their power and to become more and more authoritarian? This is the question. Yes, they had some partners who tried to use their services. This is other question, but this is when we discuss geopolitics. Geopolitics is not moral. It's geopolitics. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Thank you all for coming. Very much appreciated. We're about to announce the winners of next year's Romanian Cultural Institute scholarship at the Wilson Center. So stay tuned for that. And thank you guys for your participation here in this event, but also for the months you spent here in the work. And we look forward to your papers. So thank you.